Okay, so this is where we were last. Um, as a reminder, since this is chapter 3 and we're about halfway through now, all the materials should be up on Blackboard. We might finish the chapter today, or at the very least, we're going to get very close to the end today. So probably, maybe we'll do the study guide next time. I mean, even if we've got like 2 slides left, we can do 2 slides and then like the study guide. Which again, I'm gonna bring the test in and have it here, and I'm going to basically ask questions off the test, and you guys are gonna hopefully have at least looked over the study guide and maybe have it with you if you can get it printed out, or if you've got a laptop or whatever electronic device you use, you can just have it on there. And as we go down, you go through your notes and hopefully answer the questions, and that's how we're going to do the study guide. And then the test will be the next time, so sometime next week. And then, again, since we're getting near the end of September, let me check my calendar one more time, because I can't do a calendar in my head. Yes, next Wednesday is when your first paper's due. So just as a reminder, that's the 1st of October. That'll be our last day before our fall break, which is, Francis Marion's fall break. I don't know when y'all's high school fall break is, but that's usually pretty close to the end of the semester anyway, so we're just going to go ahead and do it earlier in the semester, which is just like the first 2 days of the following week. That'll give me time to hopefully get most of the papers graded. So that's just when I'm going to do it. Any questions? Yes. If you can print it out, that'd be great. If not, you can just email it to me. And again, for you online folks, that's just for my in-person classes. If you're online, you just email it to me. There's no Dropbox or special anything. Just when you email it to me, please attach it as a file. Attach it as either a Word document. Word document's kind of preferred, but I can read a PDF document just as easy. That doesn't hurt anything. And if converting it to a PDF document does weird things to the formatting, don't worry about it. I'm not worried about the formatting. Like, if that makes it so it's like one big paragraph and it makes it so it's only one page, I understand it. I get that. That's fine. Don't worry about it. I understand. I'm not here for formatting. I'm here for the content. That said, if you send me like a Word document that's just one big paragraph, that wasn't the formatting that did it. That was you. Try to give me a couple of paragraphs. Like, don't just word block at me. Make it so it's easier for me to read. I can get through it quicker and give me a grade and move on. Any other questions? 2 to 3 double spaced. So it's not too big. That's like a page and a half, not double spaced. It's not very big. There's like a couple of paragraphs. Your intro, like maybe 2 or 3 for the body, and then like the conclusion, you're done. Not much to it. I don't really do word count so much as just the content. I'm mostly worried about, did you say what needed to be said in the paper? Which is why, if you want to do something besides the default topic, let me know so I can make sure you're not going for something that's too broad. Because there can be things that are way too big for a 2 to 3 page paper. Because some people are like, oh, well, I want to talk about George Washington's life. Like, you can't do that. You can't do that in 2 to 3 pages. You can't talk about George Washington's, like, 10-year-old life in 2 to 3 pages. So, yeah. All right. Obviously, if you're weird and want to, like, really do a lot and go way over, I'm not one of the weird professors who are like, well, you went over the limit, so you're going to get, like, a D. No, I don't do that. I've had a couple of very strange students that are like, I want to do, like, a 15-page paper. It's like, you don't have to, but fine. Certainly not saying you guys have to do that. You absolutely don't, but if there's something you, like, really, really want to talk about, whatever, you're welcome to. Anything else? All good? All right, let's jump into this. Yeah, we did end at a pretty decent spot last time. Talked about stuff basically dealing with Spain, the invasion of Georgia, and the Georgia militia having to fight off Spanish forces pretty much on their own. So, all of that. Whoop. So, the issue with doing 2 of the same class but being in slightly different places is I don't remember quite how. Okay, we've probably not gotten this far talking about this yet. These. The colonies soon became part of the global trade market. European taste made market decisions in China, shift their trade, porcelain, cloth, tea, and sugar. Obviously, forced labor from Africa allowed for the colonies to produce a lot of raw materials and eventually even finished products, which meant that Africa was also part of this global trade. And North America, which had once simply been like this wilderness that was producing whatever goods they could find, initially with the Spanish, gold and silver, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to this in just a minute. Well, yeah, to like lumber and eventually tobacco, which is at least cultivated. But once they start actually showing up in numbers, you've got settlements there. And when people are at least comfortable enough that they're surviving, they're going to want luxury goods. So now they're buying silk and calico and olive oil, etc. So you've got goods from the East going into North America. And then also sending goods out into Europe and Asia. And this is a neat little thing that I didn't actually know about until I started doing notes for this class. Well, I'll say this class has been almost 10 years now. This course, I should say. There was trade within North America. Which makes sense, but like within the greater North America. New England trading with the southern colonies, and then the southern colonies trading with New England and like the Caribbean, because even though it's all, the American colonies, they were making and producing different things. So they were able to trade within the colonies. Now, there wasn't much overland trade. We'll see this. Shoot, it might be. No, it was under Jefferson, so it'll be this semester. I was gonna say it might be next semester before we see it. It's this semester. It's not until like literally Jefferson before they start building halfway decent roads. All this trade is by sea. It's from port to port. If you want to go from Charleston to Virginia, you take a boat. You don't go. You don't take a horse and cart up through North Carolina. There's nothing in North Carolina. There's no roads. There's hardly any people. Granted, considering the state of the roads in North Carolina today, it's about the same. I don't know. Not like the roads in South Carolina are any better. And then this last bit, which, again, I'm not much of an economist, and economy stuff is admittedly pretty boring. But this is kind of important. Periodicals, which is, you could say it's newspapers, but specifically it's like the business section of the newspaper, so it's the part of the newspaper. If you've ever read a newspaper, it's the part of the newspaper you've never read, because it's the most boring part of the newspaper. It's like the stock tickers at the bottom of the news channel that, again, you never pay attention to because it's just boring numbers with like green and red arrows and stuff. It's like, it's not important. It will never affect you. Well, it'll affect you like in the grocery store, but like it's something that we in our daily lives will never care about because we don't make that much. We don't make enough money to be involved. The fact that these were coming to North America to inform the businessmen of what trade was doing worldwide, like where stuff was being bought and sold for different prices, meant that the businessmen in North America were important enough to the world trade that they were being included. So that's why this is important at all, is that I was going to say United States. We're not there yet. The British colonies in particular were important enough that they were being included, which is pretty cool. Again, economic stuff is boring to me. But it's important in the grand scheme of things. Because, the economy kind of runs everything. So you've got sort of the overall trade, everything going on here. As you can see, the majority of it's by sea. Not much of this Central Asia stuff. I don't know how much of that was actually going on, because that's a lot of really rough territory they'd be going through. But yeah, this is what we're looking at here, is trade between Europe and North America, and then between North America and West Africa, of course, for the slavery, and then between West Africa and Europe into the Caribbean, and then eventually again into North America, which is more or less considered the same place, the Caribbean and North America, because they're all European colonies. And then this chapter, wow, this image here shows this, but closer, but also it shows that little sort of internal trade between the continent and the islands, which again, it doesn't show that there was trade like from the south to the north, and even from the north to, say, the mid-Atlantic, the Virginia colonies, the Cape colonies, because those were still different from, say, way up here in New England. So there was trade all along the colonies as well as down here into the Caribbean. And then, of course, overseas. All right. Yes, time for the big brain move here. So, with all these empires and kingdoms and whatnot fighting each other, either literally, militarily, or at least economically, because, again, like, England and the Netherlands never really went to war, but they had lots of little trade wars. So, and everybody was constantly at war with each other in terms of like trying to beat each other economically. Just that was the norm. Um, so the French finance minister Jean-Baptiste Colbert um, came up with this idea that became known as mercantilism, which is also something we learn in my 104 course, I believe. Yeah, because that comes up after like Napoleon. So, or no, not after Napoleon. It leads up to Napoleon. Anyway, the idea is to maintain a favorable balance of trade, and that doesn't mean anything to you. It basically means that they need to have more gold and silver coming into the country than going out. So there should be more stuff being traded to other countries and them buying more stuff than buying from other countries. And if that sounds familiar, good, you're paying attention. If not, you're not paying attention. So this was what tariffs were for. They taxed foreign imports and specifically made it so that the trade within the empire would be most beneficial. Which is to say, if this is the easiest example I have, well, let me just go ahead and get to it. Yeah, okay. It was easiest for Great Britain because Great Britain had a big-ass empire. They also had the Navigation Act of 1660, where you had to, if you're going to trade anything with Europe, you had to send it through London first, which is what started the aforementioned trade war with the Dutch. We don't really talk about that here, so don't worry about it. There was also pretty much, well, I mean, I say pretty much, there was literally a law against trading with other nations, but that was very hard to enforce. So they just made it where tariffs caused it to be more or less financially impossible to buy outside goods. So here's the example I always give. You go to your local, I don't know, general store in North America, and you're going to get a big-ass barrel of sugar because that's just what's on the shelf. And the big-ass barrel of sugar from England, or from the English, Caribbean, is 50 pounds sterling, which, I don't know, I'm guessing that's fair. But from the French colonies, it's 40 pounds sterling. But the English Parliament, the English, whatever their economic department is called, put a 15-pound tariff on it. Hell no, 20-pound tariff on it. So, using our wonderful math skills, what does the French sugar now cost? It was 40, and now there's a 20-pound tariff on it. So it's 60 pounds. So what are you going to buy? The English or the French? If the English is 50, and the French is now 60. Obviously you're going to buy English because English is cheaper, and you're supporting the crown. Wonderful. Or if the French is 40 without the tariffs, what else might you do? How does one get around a tariff? Well, not so much make your own, but how would you get your hands on, say, French sugar without the tariff? Not so much stealing it. It's still illegal, but it's not stealing it. was a lot of famous people did this, as well as a lot of famous fictional people, though they never actually got into what it was they were moving around. So what is it called when you go and say get something you're not supposed to get and then bring it across borders? Smuggling. They'd go down to the Caribbean and buy a bunch of French sugar and bring it back and sell it for, well, cheaper than the English sugar. They would still make a profit, and the people would be able to pay less than what the English were charging. John Hancock, in fact, made his money running rum from Canada, which at the time was still a French holding. And if you're not familiar, John Hancock was like one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. So, yeah, that's why he's important. I mean, this was common on the continent too, like over in Europe. Very, very common for people to just like, well, I'm not paying these stupid tariffs, I'm just going to smuggle stuff. But this is assuming you've got like an entire empire where you can produce everything you need, and not like you're in an international market where you have to buy stuff from everybody and then you tariff stuff, basically tariffing yourself because you're a dumbass. But what do I know? I'm just a historian. Anyway, here is Jean-Baptiste Colbert. He's having a great time. And here is that market map again, but with fewer pixels. This is what mercantilism was supposed to be. This idea of the colonies are simply sources of, well, raw resources for the motherland. Gold and silver, food, raw materials, which, I mean, in a sense, they were for England. I may have mentioned to you guys before, if England today, well, it's less so because of we've got, world trade. But if England was cut off entirely from its empire, which, I don't know, the Commonwealth today, but regardless, if England was completely cut off from the rest of the world, had no international trade, just had to survive on the land that it's got, most of the population would starve because they don't have enough land to grow food for the people that live on the land of Britain. But because they've got this huge empire, even if they're not trading with other parts of the world, they can still ship food into England and be fine. Especially when they had India, that was more than enough land to feed them and everybody else. This was more how mercantilism worked, and I always like this image because it looks like Mom from Futurama, where you bring in the raw resources and you're paid but a pittance, and then the raw resources are made into manufactured goods, and then you have to pay a large sum for, say, manufactured goods, even though it's made from the raw resources that you just brought the mother country. But hey, it's now a manufactured good. You should pay more. Whereas you could sell the raw goods to other countries for much more, but you technically can't do that because, well, Motherland says don't do that. And then because, well, it's the internet and you can just like steal entire slides off the internet wholesale. Here's somebody else's slide of um, how people reacted to smuggling or mercantilism and smuggling, and that's John Hancock. Although they did kind of give it away in the title there. All right, on to less amusing things. Because, of course, if we're going to talk about the economy in North America, we have to talk about the slave trade. So, Parliament established the Royal African Company in 1672. By 1713, England could sell slaves to Spanish settlers, which, like, or Spanish settlements, I should say, which, like, I thought the English couldn't trade with Spain, but I guess slavery's fine. Anyway, between 1700 and 1808, about 3 million captive Africans were brought across the Atlantic in Anglo-American ships. This doesn't count the Dutch, Portuguese, or Spanish ships, so that's not like the full number. That's just the ones that were brought over by the English and later American slave ships. You've got the Middle Passage, which is the infamous bit between Africa and North America / the Caribbean, which due to the terrible conditions of the ship, how mistreated the slaves were, and how they were packed in the ship, which unfortunately I have images for, resulted in about 500,000 deaths over the course of the run of slavery. And considering like the mortality rate of just regular ass sailors during this time period, and what I'm about to show you, it's a wonder that they only lost 500,000 out of the 3 million due to people just dying on the ship. It's horrific. There was also a period of so-called seasoning after the slaves arrived, usually in the West Indies, where they gradually regain their strength, because again, it takes like a month to get overseas from Europe / Africa to North America. Became accustomed to the new environment, learned new commands in a language they were completely unfamiliar with, dealt with new food and diseases. Many of them, of course, died during this time. Also, apparently, like a big part of the, quote, seasoning was just like beating them. Just like, let's get them used to being physically mistreated. And by 1700, most of the Africans were being sent to North America, or most of the Africans who were being sent to North America, I should say, went straight to Charleston rather than the West Indies, because by then Charleston had a thriving slave market. Good for Charleston. So, this is something that I mentioned before, where you've got this huge influx from Africa, and like most of it, about half of them go to Brazil. Because of how deadly Brazil was. Because it's like, okay, you get to work in the silver mines. What's that? The silver mines sometimes heat up to like 150 degrees Fahrenheit and have like deadly gases in them. Well, that's why we're sending slaves. They just worked people into in the mines until they died, and then brought more over. That's why it's that many. And then obviously also being Brazil in like literally the rainforest, plenty of plantations, plenty of really, really intense plantations. Most of the rest, once again, as you can see, went to the Caribbean because, as I have also said before, the sugar plantations were also work the slaves to death situations. So they just worked them until they died, so they went and got more. And then the final bit, well, there's a tiny sliver that went up to like Europe. There were like slaves in England. They're mostly what in America they'd call house slaves, like domestic servants. Not to say they were treated well, because they certainly were not, but like they weren't plantation slaves. You're just like, oh well, we're gonna just have a servant that we can keep for life and not pay. Cool. They certainly were the lucky ones by comparison. Because by 1808, England's like, hey, slavery kind of sucks. Let's just stop and not have a war over it. So England just stopped. And then, of course, there's the percentage that goes to North America, where most of them weren't worked to death. So they were able to actually live long enough to reproduce and have a relatively stable slave population. So, let's talk about the slave ships, as much as I don't want to. This is how they were packed. These are people. This is 292 human beings stowed on a ship. 130 of them stowed under shelves. Let's see. Showing the stowage of 130 additional slaves around the wings or sides of the lower deck by means of platforms or shelves in the manner of galleries in a church. Slaves stowed on the shelves, all the shelves and below them only have a height of 2 feet 7 inches between the beams and far less under the beams. So, imagine like a shelving unit. That's where you get to be for the next month. Also, you're chained to the person next to you. Also, there's no airflow. Also, you're in the mid-Atlantic in the tropics, so it is 110 degrees Fahrenheit with 100% humidity. And you're lying in your own shit for a month. It's no wonder that a bunch of people died. Oh, also, as I mentioned, everyone is chained together. So if the ship went down, everyone died. I mean, obviously not the crew. The crew, could get out. But if the ship were to sink, there's no saving it. Nobody's able to get out. Even if they could swim, which most of them could not, but if they could, they're chained down. They're not in little prison cells. They're treated like. I always get to this point. They weren't treated like animals. They were treated like less than animals. Because you couldn't do this to cows or horses. They'd freak out and kill each other. If you're gonna bring a horse across the ocean for a month, you have to give it enough room to move around and not lay down, because horses don't necessarily lay down to sleep. Sometimes they do. Doesn't matter. It would need to have enough room to lie down in case it wanted to, or it, again, would freak the hell out. You couldn't do this with animals. You couldn't do this with pigs. You couldn't do this even with chickens, even though chicken farms are pretty messed up. But you couldn't chain them together in as small a space they could possibly be. But we did it to humans. And it's like that, it's astounding. And it's not even this. This is bad enough, but let's cram them in the smallest, hey, we've got room here. Let's just play Tetris. Let's just stick them in. Got 3 people there. You can cram a person there. Oh, look, you can put a kid there. So this person's not just crammed in there, but they're like this for a month. So yeah, and this is the beginning. This is the start of their journey. So yeah, just felt like we should definitely talk about that. So on to, I guess technically more economy stuff. So these various economic systems turn these cities into. Oh, I skipped ahead. Yeah. Turn the seaport cities into hubs of culture and commerce, like they were the place to be. Again, as I said, it was kind of a matter of just practicality because there were no roads. There just were not any roads. So the only way to really get stuff from one place to another was by boat. I mean, there were dirt roads, but like if it rained, you're not taking that dirt road. It's a mud now. So you could get stuff from like a farmstead to the city, but that was not viable for like long-term, long-distance travel. So we had cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Charleston, which were the main cities at the time. But they were like 10% of the population total. It wasn't like today where most of the population lives in the cities. Still, though, they were the centers of the economy, the politics, the social and cultural activity. It was where everything was happening. So as these families became more affluent, which is to say they were making more money, the status of a family was less about pedigree, which is to say family heritage, or which is what was said rather. Like, was your great-great-grandfather a noble of some fancy house? Who cares? Does your family right now have money? Does it? Great. So this was the new, like, class system. And not just does your family have money, but can you be a show-off about it? Leading to sort of this genteel lifestyle where you can think about a lot of the founding fathers because most of them were upper class, where they've got, you know, the fancy shirts and the tights and the weird little shoes and the powdered wigs. Like, that was upper class 1700s people. Now, this did mean that the upper class could be open to more people because you didn't have to be, you know, some English aristocrat, or English noble, I should say, aristocrats, whatever term, which, again, that's just by birth. That's not something you could ever achieve. It had to be something from, like, the Middle Ages. You were from a family connected to some knight from the Middle Ages. So more people could become upper class, including people of Dutch, Scottish, French, and Jewish heritage. So you didn't even have to be English, that as long as you could achieve financial success. Now, granted, of course, if you weren't English, you weren't going to be treated the same. But if you were successful enough, you could overcome the fact that you were something as terrible as, say, French. Ben Franklin was one such genteel, made his way up in the 18th century. He was initially an apprentice in his brother's print shop. Apparently his brother treated him like crap, so he just like, screw it, I'm leaving, and he left and went and did a bunch of other things. Let's see. He published his first essays in his brother's paper, New England Corinth, yeah. Went to New York and Philadelphia. Um, he had political connections. Purchased the Pennsylvania Gazette, became the colony's official printer. Okay, then it just goes on to other stuff. We'll talk more about Ben Franklin later. Still, though, the fact that, like, wealth became the new status symbol, not that it was never not the status symbol, but you could only be wealthy if you were of elite. Um, did mean that there was this greater gap between the rich and the poor. That those with money were getting more money, while those without money stayed poor, or were in fact losing money, due to the ones with money also being the ones with power. Therefore, they were the ones making the laws. Therefore, they were making laws that made it so that they were able to hold on to their money while they were squeezing money out of the lower class. Weird how that works. So here's just some images of like port towns. These two, they're very much the same style. I don't really know where this came from. I just found them and decided to include them. Here's Ben Franklin about the electrocuted child. I remember him having like a kid with him, and like his assistant or whatever. But I don't remember why he was there, or if like Ben Franklin was like, "Hey, are you hold this? I don't want to get hit by lightning. I'm not that stupid, but I want to observe, see what happens." Anyway. All right. So, labor was very much needed in the colonies. They were constantly building things. They were constantly clearing land, constantly needing people to farm the land. But actually finding work was difficult because there was a lot of competition. Which is to say, there were a lot of systems in place that made it so that, to use today's terminology, a good, honest worker couldn't go and work. You couldn't go and get an honest wage for your work because there was a lot of other systems in place that were taking your work. Indentured servants, convict labor, and eventually slave labor because, well, the people in charge didn't feel like paying you. And again, when I say there's systems in place taking your work, it's not the people who were working there taking your work, it's the people who were running the site, running the system that are taking your work because they don't feel like paying you. I don't understand how people are like, oh, well, these people are taking our work. It's like, maybe it's the people hiring them. Who are the ones making the decision? Anyway. We got redemptioners, which is another system that was brought in the 1720s. This is very similar to indentured servitude, where they would come in and have to basically work a number of years to, quote, redeem their the cost of passage to North America. The difference is that they, rather than like living at the home or the plantation of wherever it was they were working, they could actually have their own home and their own family and be relatively independent. They would just have to come in to work each day like a regular employee would. So this was a less harsh form of indentured servitude. And actually, as I'm going to show you here in just a little bit, a lot of this wasn't let me rephrase that. A lot of this wasn't necessarily farm labor like indentured servitude almost always was. I've got a newspaper clipping from this time that shows a lot of German redemptioners coming over, and a lot of them are like high skilled workers. I mean, we've got like diamond cutters and stuff, like real, like what we consider today like white collar workers. Um, so they were definitely working in like workshops and stuff, not out in the fields. There was the apprenticeships, which is from way back in like medieval Europe. Um, Now, it was modified a little bit for over here, but the original concept from over in Europe, was basically the apprentice would be adopted by the family of wherever it is he's going to work. Usually it's a male child. And as the child is growing up, they're learning the trade. Now, typically, as far as working, they're doing menial labor. They're sweeping out the shop. They're, emptying the trash. They're bringing everybody beer. Because again, drinking on the job was normal. I say beer. It was usually ale. Which doesn't have a high alcohol concentration. But gradually, they would learn the trade, and eventually, at least on paper, although sometimes this wasn't the case, would take over that trade. So they would say, if you were adopted by, I don't know, a blacksmith, you would start by like cleaning out the forge and sweeping up all the ash and taking out the little metal bits, and then eventually you would learn how to actually work the anvil and like what parts not to touch because they're hot. And then by the time you're like an adult, you know how everything works. And now, granted, you would still work for a couple of years as a journeyman under the master of the shop, but then by the time he's too old to really keep working, he would pass it on to you, and you become the master of the shop, and then you would have journeymen and apprentices under you. But unfortunately, it's a very pyramid scheme system, because there can only, at least in old Europe, there could only be like one master per town, but there are always multiple journeymen under that master and then multiple apprentices under that. And so each journeyman had to either hope they'd be the next master or go to another town and hope that they needed a new master craftsman or whatever. It was kind of a garbage system. And then, of course, convict labor. There was lots of overcrowding in British jails. I should bring up that one of the ways the British dealt with this was prison ships, where since they had lots of ships and lots of them were really old, some of them were no longer seaworthy. So rather than just like scuttle them, they would bring them into the Thames River, anchor them down, just like tear off the mast because you don't need that anymore, and turn them into little floating prisons. Unfortunately, even though they were just sitting in the river, they were still full of horrendous diseases. And if you were on one of these prison ships, it was about a 50-50 whether you were going to live through it, which was about the same of being in any prison in England. Which we'll get to during the Revolutionary War. But point being, you don't want to be in a British jail. So if you get the option to get kicked over here to North America to work off your time in, say, Georgia, it's probably a pretty good deal, because you don't want to be in a British prison. Because like when I talk about like British history, most of it's like there was this rebellion, and they captured and if the leader doesn't get killed in the rebellion, he gets captured and then dies in British prison. It's just always just dies in British prison. And it's never, was mysteriously killed. He just dies of disease in the British prison. Obviously, with all this going on, and then of course slave labor too on top of all of this, there was a lot of competition for jobs. So people who were just like trying to do farm labor or just any kind of basic labor for a wage had a lot of other people already doing it for basically nothing because they had no other choice. So now you're competing for jobs that nobody wants to do because the people that are doing them don't want to do them. So here's that newspaper clipping I was telling you guys about. Does it have a year on it? Yes, November 19th, 1816. So this is a while after, but they're still doing redemptioners. That's interesting. Still though, so here we have arrived from Holland a ship, yada yada yada. Farmers, gardeners, potters, tailors, shoemakers, bakers, butchers, yada 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 yada. Here we go. Musical instrument makers, weavers, brewers, gilders, diamond cutters, vineyard men, millers, stocking weavers, blacksmiths, wheelwrights, seamstresses, sugar refiners. That's pretty pretty high tier too. Distillers, shippers, confectioners, coopers, glaziers, masons, etc. And then also just like boys and girls that don't have any skills, they can be servants for a little while to make up the passage money. Like just all down the line, all sorts of stuff. Now again, as you can see, like at the top, also gardeners and farmers and stuff. So yeah, those as well. But like these are things that you see in shops. Ain't no diamond cutter out there working the fields. He's in a fancy shop. I mean, a vineyard, yeah, you're technically in a field, but you're making money. That's you're making money for wine. I mean, you're growing grapes for wine, but yeah. So that's pretty cool. Apothecary shop. This is 14th, 15th century Belgium, be the Flemish. So this is a little bit early. This is just basic, apprentices doing basic stuff here at the front while everyone else is doing the actual like transactions. And then the English convicts being sent off to Georgia. Yes, there are 2 children here. Everyone's chained by the neck, and they, I guess, had to get some extra long chains so they could chain the children as well. Their crime was either they're orphans or they're Irish. So, or both. Considering how many Irish were often killed in England. Maybe both. So yeah, they're going to Georgia. All right. Yeah, actually, if you've ever read a Charles Dickens book or seen a movie or anything based on Charles Dickens, there's always like the lovable little street urchin. Now, this is what typically happened to them. They got clapped in irons and either thrown in prison to die at a young age or sent off to a prison colony. The lovable urchin didn't typically have a very good life. Not a very long life either. All right. So, how they dealt with this. All this competition. Also, there was a land shortage, which feels weird. Like, even today, there's so much land in the United States. As much as some people are like, we don't have any room. It's like, there's so much room. There's just a lot of land you don't really want to live on because it's out in the middle of nowhere and there's tornadoes there. But there's a lot of land. But it's just like early on, there wasn't as much land as there were people, and you couldn't go as far west as they wanted because the natives didn't want you there, but also the French and Spanish were starting to bump into the Spanish and French. Also, there was a population boom, part of which was a lot of people were showing up, but also the health of the colonists are getting a little bit better, so less folks are dying like during childbirth, which is good, I guess. Although, I mean, it's not great for the people that are already around, but whatever. So this resulted in migrant labor, which is to say, free laborers, and again, a free laborer is just a person that has a lot of basic skills. They can farm, they can build, they can haul stuff, they can do essential labor jobs. They're not again, to go back to that Redemptioner page, they're not a stone cutter or or rather a diamond cutter or like a stonemason, but they can do the farming and the hauling and everything else. They can do your regular basic jobs. They go from town to town. They help farmers during harvest, unload ships, build houses in towns. Again, just basic helping people out. And this is something from my American Technology course, but during harvest season, farmers would accept pretty much any help they could get. When it was time to harvest, the farmer would obviously be doing the harvesting. His wife would be harvesting. If the kids could walk, they were harvesting. If the grandparents could walk, they were harvesting. If the neighbors weren't harvesting their crops, they were coming over and helping. If there was some random dude on the street, hey, you want to make a buck? Come help. Like, you had to harvest as quickly as possible, because once the crops are ready, they will start rotting on the vine if you don't harvest them immediately. And if they do, there goes your livelihood. So you had to harvest immediately. So these people were pretty well liked by the common man. That said, they weren't always welcome, and were sometimes warned out of towns, which is to say, they weren't evicted, but they were told that if something happened to them, if they got hurt or sick, they couldn't really rely on public aid because it was reserved for the residents, and the town can't afford to help transient workers. I guess it's just sort of a like, the residents pay the taxes, so the public aid is reserved for the residents, and since these people are just passing through, they're technically not paying taxes because they're just coming in, helping, and then leaving. Yes, it's just a whole thing. Eventually, though, by 1750, we had some seaport cities that created almshouses and workhouses to help those that needed it. Basically, if you needed food and you needed a place to sleep, you could go to these places and get food or a place to sleep. But in return, you had to work. You had to do some amount of work. And typically, the workhouse would take whatever money you would have been paid, because they're making some money back for their investment. So while it would help the person that was starving and or needing a place to sleep safely for the night, it's certainly not helping that person like get on their feet. I don't know. They did a lot of this in England. So you've got your typical transient workers. This will be the 1800s since it's a photograph. Although I don't know why it looks like they're in the middle of like World War I no man's land. I don't know what's going on with the ground there. It looks like it's been bombed out. And then here's like a drawing. I don't know why the children look demon-possessed, but they do, so there you go. The child standing on the wheel especially is like, that child is going to eat your face. Why are they like this. And the workhouses, I think this one was in Providence, Rhode Island. There were two sides to these workhouses. So again, like, they did genuinely help people. When you had no place to go, when you were literally starving on the street, these places were great. And as you can see, very big and fancy. But part of that was also the cities that had them wanted to show off, like, how magnanimous they were and like how Christ-like they were by being big and fancy. I don't know. So yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword. And also, like, how big and fancy they were on the outside didn't necessarily mean they were great on the inside. Most of the time they were good. Sometimes not so much. Because like in Ireland during the potato famine, the almshouses were free. You went in and you got what you needed. Where we at? Yeah. The workhouses, you had to work first, and then you could get what you needed. In Ireland, when people were starving to death, and they didn't have the energy to work, they just locked you out. So there were many incidents of, like, the Irish just starving or freezing to death in the streets, almost skeletal from having no food, right outside of a workhouse because they didn't have the energy to work, so the British locked them out. We're not going to talk too much about that because that's a different class, but that's pretty common for the British. Yeah, let's get a little bit more done. We're probably not going to finish the chapter, but we're going to be really close so we can knock it out and then do the study guide on Wednesday. So, as we mentioned, cities were like the main focal point of the colonies, but most people lived out in the countryside in little small family homes. Now again, the countryside, or even the frontier, as I might call it, was like a few miles inland at the most. It wasn't even near the Appalachians for the most part. It was just a little bit inland on the eastern states. So as the towns grew, and really the population overall grew, they needed food and other such farm goods, so the farms grew as well and provided these goods. Meanwhile, the farms were able to purchase goods from the towns to save time. Things like cloth and cheese that saved them a lot of time. If you're not familiar, and again, this is more my technology course that I used to teach, cloth making was a pain in the ass. There's no two ways to put that. The old idea of just like the person on the woman on the wheel spinning the yarn. The reason that's pictured all the time is because that's what they were doing all the time. One, they made it from flax, which is like, it's a plant material. And it's really, really fragile. It's really, really brittle is the word I'm looking for. So you had to be careful with it, for one. For two, it took like a year to spin enough thread to make cloth. So they'd just be sitting there like spinning thread and spinning thread and spinning thread. I had a small excerpt from a journal from, I think, a teenage girl from that time, and it was in like January, and she had finally finished up like all the thread that she had, and she wrote in her journal something along the lines of, "I have finally escaped my time in hell," something along those lines. Very dramatic, but like just to show how how much torture it was, essentially, just like the constant, all the time, doing the same thing all day long. If you had any amount of time that you weren't working on something else, you were either spinning yarn or making butter slash cheese, which is to say the churn thing. So if you could buy that from town, do it. It saves so much time where you could be doing something else. Even if that something else is just like nothing. That'd be wonderful. However, the fact that people were like not dying in childbirth, which again, I know it sounds terrible me saying that like that's a bad thing. That because the tradition for farmers was that they would split their land among all their sons. Obviously, daughters were just out of luck, but they would find somebody to marry, I guess. So if you had like 150 acres, let's make it 150, and you had 3 sons, they would each get 50. That's actually still not very much. It doesn't matter. But if you had, I don't know, 6 sons, and they all survived, because you usually would have a lot of kids back then, because the mortality rate was pretty high. But suddenly people are living longer, or I should say living at all. The lands are getting split up a lot, and nobody's got enough land to really make it. But also, there's lots of people coming from overseas again. There was a boom in wheat prices, so there was a bunch of Germans and Scots-Irish coming from the Mid-Atlantic, they came to the Mid-Atlantic and set up their communities. And last time when I was talking to other students, I said, I know about the Scots-Irish having lots of kids. I wasn't sure about the Germans. And then I remembered going through Pennsylvania and running across the Amish, who again speak German as their first language. And like, yeah, no, they got a lot of kids. So these are huge population booms in the middle of the colonies. In the South, much smaller population concentration. Much, much fewer people, just in general. If you showed up to the South and you wanted land, as long as you had the money, and it was a lot less money than it was up north, you were probably fine. That said, the laws and markets were controlled by the planters, which is to say the slave owners. So, as I said earlier, all the laws are made to benefit the rich and not the poor. So if you were poor, none of the laws are made to help you. None of the tax codes are made to help you. In fact, they're probably there to hurt you in order to benefit the rich. Weird how that works. But that's just how it works. So just real quick, a couple of images of folks making their little homesteads. These guys are right by the water. There's their ship right there. This one's in Europe because, as you can see, the buildings in the background. But hey, they're harvesting wheat. This one's definitely over here in North America because there's so much wood. That's another thing with my American and Technology course, where it's like, if there was anything that you weren't sure about for the first test, the answer was probably wood, because North America was so heavily forested that everything was made out of wood because we just had so much in abundance. So we'll finish the last 2 slides on Wednesday and then do the study guide. Well, I say 2 slides. Is it 2? Yeah, it's 2. All right, I'll see y'all Wednesday.